two essays on courtly love, and he points out that this thing that this tradition of like troubadouric poetry that arose in the south of Provence in the south of France was utterly unique in the sense that in all the literature and poetry before it, stories of love were not central. That like the type of love that happens in the like troubadour tradition that we can trace to like Languedoc in the south of France is a unique vision of love that never happened before in our like recorded Western tradition of literature. You know, his analysis has much to be tangled with more oral traditions and then also just non-Western stories and indigenous traditions of storytelling. But you know, in this like little world that he was unpacking around literature as a philologist and that kind of storyteller, and that it arose and no one can quite figure out what happened to allow the alchemy for this thing to arise. There's a lot of like sort of ideas about like the engagement with what one might call the Middle East through the Crusades kind of brought this tradition of gallantry and chivalry and a certain type of love into France, and also that that sort of the obsession with the classics, and Ovid, who wrote a book called the Art of Love, which gets held up as sort of the origin of troubadour poetry, but also in C.S. Lewis's analysis, he believes it's actually it's a satire of love. It's actually a joke that Ovid was making, and I don't know where I land on that. I'll spend more time with Ovid, but that this is a like unique thing that love is at the center of it, and this story of Tristan and Isolde, that's really what's happening. It's about love, and it's about this particular type of love, of courtly love, and it's about courtly love. One of its pillars is adultery, and one of its and that is because at this time that we're talking about, marriage was about political alliances, and it was about political alliances, particularly in like the court. Marriage was about political alliance and about political alliances that melted and the necessity for them changed. So you would have these relationships that 5 years later, when a new war started, would become the purpose of them had become moot. And so all of these sort of all of these women getting put aside and forgotten about, and kind of left when the powers of the military might kind of shifted in their need, and so that this theme of adultery comes in because and is actually in courtly love one of the things that you need for it to be love. You can't have love in a marriage in this tradition, because that wasn't marriage's purpose. That the Guinevere Lancelot tension is, or the Tristan and Isolde tension is like necessity. That's where love exists. I think that's very curious, as we have a very different relationship to love now, and a very different relationship to marriage now, in some ways, and in others not. It's an intriguing question. And the last thing I'll say about the nerdy historiography side is something that I'm really curious about is the what he calls the feudalization of love. And in the troubadour, in this tradition of courtly love, they didn't call the knight errant who was in love with the lady, didn't call her my lady, he called her Midans, and Midans means my lord. And so there was this inversion of the energies and the hierarchies of feudalism, where a knight would be in service to a lord, and there would be this like bond of honor and brotherly affection. And it was this transmutation of that, where then suddenly these beloved women who this poetry was getting written to were they were the center of power in the tradition of courtly love, in this poetry, and then also in the places where it may have been happening in an actual like lived out way. So I'm just curious about this tradition, and I'm curious about this inversion of hierarchies and power structures in acts of love. Um, um, and so I think some of that's in this story. Tristan and Isolde is really interesting because it's, in my feeling of it, it's like very much a novel. It's novel-esque. It reminds me of reading something that was just written yesterday in its like thrust, in its plot line, but it's got these like incursions of the mythic into it that fuel the story, but it doesn't have the same sort of enchanted mythic quality that some of the other story arcs have, with their sorts of things just running in out of the wild, and the quest disappears and then comes up over here, and like all this stuff. There's this very just kind of engine-like movement that builds up in a way that I think that are like the way we entangle with stories now is familiar to us. And so I'm curious about that, and I'll be curious to see what you think after, or curious to hear what, in another date, what people who also work with this story think about it in that context. So all of that is a preamble and a warm-up, enchanting myself to be able to say something in Storyland. Just gonna take, so I'll just, find your way to your receptive place. You brought your body here, and you've heard me say some things, and now we're gonna, go one level deeper towards whatever kind of well a story can be for us to draw water from for our lives. And in that kind of place in you, there, that kind of once upon a time place, there's once upon a time, once before time, once out beyond time, once on the underside, the belly side, that snake scaly side of time, once in deep time, once in a time like now, because all time is once upon a time. Once in a time like that. Once in a time like that, a man and a woman met in the peacock fold beauty of the court at Cornwall. This glowing beacon of ruby red light and wine and poetry down on the coast of an island wreathed in a beard that they call Merlin's beard, once in Cornwall when this man and this woman met. In King Mark's castle, King Mark's steward of courtly love, steward of poetry, steward of music, this man and this woman met. And the man long blunted in his humanness by his long years cutting flesh, pounding steel, had his breath taken away by this woman and was so silenced by it that it was indeed her name, White Flower, Blanche Flower, who had to make the first move. It was just utterly kicked him on his ass, as they say. And this courtship in this land of poetry, which was utterly foreign to this warrior, unfolded like some fever dream. And they found themselves deep in the throes of love before they could even recognize it. And Blanche Flower, who, as we'll see, is King Mark's sister, right? So we're in the family ties of Cornwall. We're like deep in the inner sanctum of Cornwall, and in that nest of love in the inner sanctum of Cornwall, Blanche Flower and this man, they have a child. She becomes pregnant, and on the eve, in the waxing of the fullness of that pregnancy, he's called away. He's called away to go do what he had done best, what everyone thought he still was, which was a cutter of flesh and a pounder of steel. And he leaves again. Like they always do, he leaves again to go find some other glory and some other quest somewhere far away. And the Blanche Flower, the White Flower, she grows to her fullness. She becomes full of pollen and seed. And in that time, she gets the news that her husband has been cut down somewhere on the opposite side of the world. Like they always do, get cut down somewhere following some quest far away. And she, in her horror, runs away into the wood. She runs away into the wood with only her handmaiden, her most trusted friend. And she gives birth in the woods. And this White Flower becomes splattered with the red blood of life as she's giving birth. And with her last breath, she voices his name. And she says, "You will be named Tristan." Tristram is his name in most of the sources. "You will be named Tristan, for you come on a wave of sorrow. For you come on a wave of sorrow with the death of your father and my death now." And she hands Tristan over to her handmaiden and breathes her last breath. Tristan means child of sorrow, bringer of sorrow, but it also might mean child of fire. We'll see at the end what we believe. She dies there, and so Tristan, this little boy, is taken away, and he's raised by his mother's handmaiden and her husband, whose name is Rual. And he's taken away from Cornwall. He's spirited away over the sea to Brittany and taken to France and Brittany across the sea, and he's raised in secret, and he's never told who he is. But he's given all the best of a childhood. He spends his days running and roaming freely on the coast, listening to the murmurings of the sea, and in the nights learning how to play the harp. And at some point in his childhood, the music of the sea and the music of the harp became indistinguishable from each other. It was as if when he was playing his harp, he was walking by the sea, and when he was walking by the sea, he was playing his harp. That deep longing of the sea in his harp, like that homeland across the water calling to him that he didn't even know was there. He grew in this way, and he learned how to hawk and to ride and to write poetry, but he always came back to the harp. And it was in this time, and this 14er time came rolling around, this time of the deep sort of magic when adventure is calling you, this time when the hawk's wings not only give you such pleasure to look at, but also give you that sorrow, because all you want to be able to do is to fly away. It was in this time that a boat full of traders rode in. This Viking ship of traders from Norway rode into the cove in Brittany and landed in the sand. They landed in the sand and they began to set up their wares on the beach. Blue glass beads from Egypt, and furs from the Black Forest in Russia, and birds of all kinds that you could not even imagine. Maybe eagle owls from Hokkaido in Japan. All of these great feathered beasts arrayed on stands on the beach. And the Viking traders, these Norwegians, speaking their strange tongue, set up on the beach and waited. And while they waited, they played chess. They were adept chess players, and they got into deep, powerful games of strategic violence there on the beach. And Tristan and his brother and Rural came down, his foster brother, but to him, his brother, come down onto the beach and are inspecting the birds, and Tristan catches wind of the Norwegian tongue, this strange fjord-sounding voice coming out of these traders. I forgot to tell you, he studied languages. This kid could speak any language you might want to speak. And so he begins to converse with these traders in Norwegian. And about the birds sitting there and who they are and what they do and where they're from. And he gets into this wonderful back and forth and begins to buy the birds. And there's something in the back and forth that mirrors the chess game that's going on, the clicking of the pieces being picked up and put down, and the back and forth of the negotiation play in some sort of rhythm with each other. And there, with the lapping of the water, you've got this symphony of adventure beginning to play itself in the unfolding. And it turns from buying the bird to playing the chess, and Tristan is now sitting there playing chess. He gets up on the deck and he starts to play chess with these traders. And each game takes longer and longer and longer as he starts to learn the rules. And he starts to learn the skill, and he starts to pick up the music of the thing, with the waves lapping on the shore, and the squawking of the birds, and the chittering of the birds, and the blowing of the furs. Each game just goes longer and longer and longer. And at some point, the Vikings look at each other. Tristan is deep in his plan. What's my next move? They look at each other and they say, we're taking this kid. This is the best chess we've ever played. This makes our games of bloody strategy look like child's play in the forests of Norway. We're taking this kid with us. At some point, while these long games are going, his brother and his dad left. They went back home. They're like, he's okay. This is our home. Nothing weird's going to happen. He's hanging out with these guys. They all speak Norwegian. It's going to be okay. Obviously not. So the boat silently pushes off the shore in that way that only a Viking ship could do, and off the coast and up on some Wales road north. Who knows if they were going back to Norway or if they were going to Egypt? What would have happened if Tristan would have just stayed on this ship forever? But at some point out on the open ocean, a storm begins to brew as if centered on this ship. Just this black hanging low cloud of wind and rain. And the defeat again and again of the Vikings in chess starts to really grate. They're like, we thought it was fun that you were good at chess. Now out here with this storm and you, it is no longer fun to lose to this little French kid. It is no longer fun to lose to this young French guy. And so they decide in some moment of inspiration, as they had done when they stole him, who knows how long it's been, to just throw him in a lifeboat and put him in the water and just let him go. Just leave him. They're like, we're out here. We're a bunch of anonymous traders. No one's going to know. No one will ever find him. He's just going to die out here. And so they leave him there, out in the sea in the middle of a storm. They leave him there. And he looks out, watching the ship go away. And he looks out over the water, and all it does is play longing in his heart. There's no discord of fear in the symphony of that moment out there on the open water with the storm brewing above his head. And the wind picks up and it just starts to push Tristan. And he falls into a revelry with the lapping of the waves against his little boat. And at some point he becomes enveloped in a mist, this gray, tangled, beard-like mist envelops his ship, his little boat. To call it a ship is a misnomer. His little tiny boat there on the water, it pushes and he lands on the shore. And as he glimpses the shore, for a second he swears he sees in the mist some strange antlered man. Or is it a stag? Or is it a strange beast in the mist? And it disappears as a stag comes jumping through the mist, leaping, pronking. I don't know if you've seen a stag pronk in fear, but 8 to 10 feet off the ground, flying through the air as an arrow strikes it directly in the heart, and its blood drops on the sand. This red blood and this white and gray mist. And he hears strange voices in a language he does not know come over the edge of the dune, and suddenly a group of strangely clad, blue painted-y, bearded men are over this stag, trying to understand what they're going to do with it. Looks like I'm frozen, but that's okay. They're over the stag trying to figure out what they're going to do, and sorry everyone, I'm just gonna go no video for a second here. They're over the stag and they're trying to figure out what they're gonna do with its body, and they begin to make the first cuts to skin this animal, its thick, beautiful pelt. And Tristan, with his folly of youth, runs over and he motions to them to stop, and somehow is able to communicate to these men, these old hunters, that he knows a better way. He knows a better way to skin this animal. The way that they're going to do it is going to destroy the pelt, and if they just only listen to Tristan, they'll do it right. And you should know, these men came from King Mark's castle at Cornwall, and if there's one thing that King Mark loves more than anything else, it's a new, beautiful thing. And so these traders let Tristan show them how to skin the animal. And indeed, it's better, it's new, and it's wonderful. And they take him again. They take him in, and they take him to Cornwall, where he is introduced to the court, and he finds himself there in this court, and there that note of longing that he's felt for so long in his life is accompanied for the first time of the harmony. This harmony of arrival enters the music of Tristan's life, and he falls into this court. And at first he was loved for his skill at hunting and his skill at hawking and his skill at skinning, and at some point he became loved for his harp playing, and that point was the first time he ever picked up a harp in court. From the instant of picking up that harp, he became loved, and his music would cast this spell of sorrow and beauty and melancholy on the court. And every night someone would ask Tristan to play, and it was in this kind of furnace of things that he became really loved by Mark. All of this time, his foster father has realized he's gone and is now searching for him everywhere. And at some point on the road, hears about this boy who can play harp that makes everyone feel sorrow out in Cornwall. And it could be no one but Tristan. He knows Tristan's harp playing. He indeed helped teach him how to play the harp. And so he finally makes his way to Cornwall. Every step of the way to Cornwall, Rual is saying, I'm going to bring Tristan back. The only reason I'm going is to bring Tristan back. He's coming back with me. He belongs at home. Every step is the only thing that gets him there. But when he arrives and he sees Tristan in the hall playing the harp with his uncle Mark that he doesn't know who is his uncle, all of his resolve melts. And the thing that comes out of his mouth, instead of demanding Tristan to come home with him, is the story of Tristan's life and the story of his real parents and this connecting him to Mark. He deepens his connection to Cornwall instead of taking him away. And leaves him there in the bosom of his family, in his place of origin. He leaves his son that he's raised his whole life there. And it's such sorrow and joy when those kinds of things happen. Such sorrow and joy. And so Tristan there is now firmly rooted in Cornwall. And it's around this time, shortly after, that Tristan finds out that the Irish king in Dublin, every 4 years, sends emissaries to Cornwall to gather up a tribute of young men and women to come and be vassals, to be slaves, really, of the Irish court, because Dublin had conquered the area around Cornwall at some time, and there was this long-lasting agreement. So happened, as it always happens. Of course, it's that 4th year. And so a ship from Ireland arrives with a giant named Morholt on its deck. I mean, we're, giant being. And Morholt arrives and demands the tribute. And King Mark agrees to give the tribute, to give away, as they always do. And just as Morholt's turning to leave, Tristan, out loud in court, asks his uncle, Mark, how can I stop this from happening? What would need to happen to make this deal, this tribute, not nullified? And Mark tells him, well, someone would need to defeat Morholt in single combat. It's the only way. It's in the clause. It's the clause in the contract. And Tristan, obviously, never fought anyone except for in training, decides he's the guy. Small little, like, think Timothy Chalamet. And then like, what's that guy's name? Like Jason Momoa or something. You know, like just like a very ill-matched experience of combat. It's a David and Goliath moment, as they say. Timothy and Jason moment. And Morholt just laughs. He just laughs and says, "You pick the place." And Tristan says, "Well, outside of your ship. I will come to the cove where your ship is placed tomorrow morning, and we will fight." So Tristan goes to bed, wakes up early with the dawn, because gets bedecked in the most beauteous gear he can find, rides his horse out to a little ship, and goes with one other to the beach with a friend whose name is escaping me. And on the beach he says, "Don't come for me." And just don't come for me. I'm either dead or it happened and I will come back. And so he gets in his boat alone and on with his horse and him, and he gets in his boat and he rides across just to the little cove, and as he comes around, he sees Morholt sitting in the shade of his ship. He lands his little boat. The first thing that Tristan does as he gets out of his boat, he gets his horse out of the boat, he turns around, he strikes a match, and he throws it into a vat of gas, of some sort of tar gas on the ship, and lights his own ship on fire and stands there in front of the flames. It's like, it's a power move. He turns to Morholt and he said, "Only one ship is needed on this beach because only one of us is leaving." Only one of us is leaving. Okay. Combat ensues. Massive. Morholt swinging these deadly blows down on Tristan, who is fast, and dodging them and fainting away, and all of this beauty, this choreographed beauty of combat. And at some point, Tristan becomes tired. And as Morholt is bringing down a devastating blow, barely gets out of the way, and the sword slices his thigh. This wound in his thigh. And it is in that distraction of Morholt's shock at actually catching this fast little squirrel of a being that he lets down his guard, and Tristan brings down his sword with incredible ferocity onto Morholt's skull and cuts through the skin into the bone, and then pulls the sword out, and a chunk of the sword is missing in Morholt's head. The sword now has this like crescent out of it. And Morholt falls to the ground, and Tristan leaves without even checking if he's dead. Just like turns around in the shock and the adrenaline of it, gets on Morholt's ship and rides it back to Cornwall, triumphant. And as he gets off the boat and is walking up the steps to the castle, he falls in a cold, violent sweat and passes out on the stairs. His memory from there is just shadows and shade as he falls deeper into this sickness. And the smell that emanates from him is just horrendous, and it's all centered on this wound. And at some point they realize that this wound is poisoned. There was poison on the blade of Morholt's sword. So they invest in calling every healer from the four corners of Cornwall and the four corners of Logres, which is Arthur's kingdom to the north. Every possible healing tradition is brought in, and no one can do anything for Tristan. He's just getting sicker and sicker and wasting away. And someday he wakes up from a dream of the sea, and he tells his uncle, "Put me in a small boat with my harp and let me go, because the sea will carry me to the place where I can be healed." The sea will carry me to the place that I can be healed. And so they put him in the small boat. They push him off into the sea, and he rides. And of course, the boat takes him to Dublin Bay. And three merchants are sitting on the dock of the bay, as they say, and they hear the wind playing Tristan's harp. They hear this fairy music coming across the bay. And the Irish hadn't forgotten anything about fairy music, and they probably haven't till this day. So they know whatever that is, we gotta listen. We gotta bring it in. So they pull the boat in, and they find this sick man, this sick boy, really. They bring him to the castle. They quickly realize that when he's brought to the queen quickly realizes it with her skill in poisons and magic, that it indeed is an Irish poison, and it only can be healed in Ireland. She doesn't realize it's her poison because she's Morholt's sister. She's the one who poisoned his blade. But she begins to heal him, and she begins to teach her daughter this art of healing through having her daughter, whose name is Isolde, help heal Tristan. You can imagine he's waking up from his sickness every once in a while. He sees her golden hair, he sees her incredible beauty, and he falls into something in an instant in his sickness. And when he wakes up, he is indeed asked / forced to teach Isolde how to play the harp, because even in his sick state, they would bring his harp to him and he would play. And it's said that when they played the harp together, his sounds were sounds of longing and her sounds were sounds of arrival and fulfillment, and they made an incredible music together. When he's healed, he slips away in the dead of the night back home with the memory of Isolde strong in his mind, her golden hair, not yellow, gold. And he goes back to his uncle Mark, and he says to Mark, I have met the most incredible, beautiful creature in Ireland. She is indeed magical and beautiful. She is incredible. She is stunning. Her hair is gold, and it's incredible, and you won't even believe. Maybe you should marry her. Mark says, oh, yeah, I don't really want to get married. I've got this whole courtly love thing going on. I don't really want to get married. It's like, hey. And one day Mark is up in his tower. And he's up in his tower, and he sees two specks of something flying in the distance, and he just watches it, like two seabirds flying in great circles. And then he realizes it's coming directly towards him, and when it gets close enough, he realizes it's two white doves with a strand of pure gold between their beaks as they're carrying it, flying directly from Ireland across the sea. And these doves land, and they drop this golden strand of hair in his hands. And he's heard the stories from Tristan. It couldn't be anyone but Isolde's hair. And he takes it as a sign. He listens to the omen, and he says, yes, indeed, I need to marry Isolde. This is a sign. This is it. And so that's where we were. Tristan offers to go across the sea back to Ireland to get Isolde for his uncle, with no thought in his head of how he's going to do it. And when he arrives in Ireland under the guise of a trailer, he hears tell of a dragon that is ravaging the countryside. Hundreds of people have died all around Dublin as this great snaking hulk black beast comes in and out of towns at night from the bogs and is spreading terror. And he sees his chance. It's like it was divinely writ that, this is the way. I'll get an audience with the king and queen again by murdering this dragon, slaying this dragon. And so he goes out into the bog and he tracks this dragon through the bog. Its tracks are huge and they smell just like the most must of animal that you've ever smelt in your life. And as he gets closer, it gets hotter and more unbearable in the bog, in this wet place. And at some point, he glimpses the dragon on the edge of his vision. And then the fight commences without, the movement is so fast that it just commences without his even being aware. And he's locked in just this carnal embrace with this dragon of blood and closeness and intensity as it writhes around him, and he attempts to get his sword in his hand, and at some point he is indeed able to sink this blade, this chipped blade, into the heart of this dragon, ending this battle in this like heap together in the bog. And he takes the dragon's tongue and cuts it out of the dragon's head as a symbol. I've done this. I've gone to this place of wetness and darkness and come back with this dragon's tongue. And he puts it in his pocket on the same thigh that he has the wound. As he leaves to go back, he takes 3 steps, and the poison from the dragon's tongue seeps into his poisoned wound that was once healed in Ireland, and he falls flat into the bog. And some say that he was deep in the bog except for his nose that was sticking out of the bog. Well, the dragon attacks stop happening, so they start to send people out to try and figure out what happened. And at some point, they find the carcass of the dragon without a tongue. And a skilled tracker then sees a strange human nose sticking out of the bog. And they fish Tristan out of this, like a bog body out of the bog. And they see that he's in a fever state yet again, lost, unconscious, in a poison fever. And they take him, you can guess, directly to Isolde, the queen, whose name is also Isolde. and he takes them there, and they begin to work their magic of healing. And this time they recognize him, and they recognize him. And Isolde has a little bit of bitterness that he snuck away in the night. You know, he didn't say goodbye, but here he is again. This guy, he just keeps coming in and out. And when he comes to, he produces the dragon's tongue from his pocket. Well, they probably found it, but you know, he needs to show it off. He's like, here's the dragon's tongue. I have it. And then he unfolds in this sort of, as he's healing, he's talking to Isolde. They're like falling back into their old love, and it's deep and magical. And he's talking about going back to Cornwall. You know, I'm going to ask your parents if you can come back to Cornwall with me. Something stops him in a lot of the tellings from telling her, are you coming back to Cornwall to marry my uncle? He's talking to her about Cornwall and all this stuff. And he finally gets an audience with the mother and father and makes his big request. And some people write that it was a little bit of a shock to Isolde. She's like, this is what's happening? But she agrees to go back to Cornwall with him. And as they're loading the ship, Isolde's mother, Isolde, comes with a bottle of wine and gives it to her handmaiden Bronwen and says, this bottle of wine is for King Mark and Isolde's wedding night. Keep good care of it and don't let anyone drink it, for it has a deep and powerful magic spell of eternal love on it. So they ride on the boat. The boat casts out of the harbor. Isolde plays her harp and sings a beautiful and sorrowful goodbye to Ireland. And as they're going, the sea becomes flat and still, and the wind disappears. And so it takes longer and longer and longer to get back to Cornwall from Ireland. And at some point, Tristan and Isolde, you know, in their playful flirtation of connection, but also with this, like, you're going to marry my uncle, and they're connecting, and they're playing, and they're singing, and they're weaving together. And at some point, Tristan's like, I think that you have a really nice bottle of wine in your cabin. I saw Bronwyn put it in there. She's like, yeah, I do. I've been told we're not allowed to drink it. He's like, well, we might be out here a while. Be nice. We could have some wine together. We could sing even deeper, more beautiful music if we had some wine. And so they get the wine, and they pop the cork on the wine, and you just like hear the little like fairy laughter as the wine is opened. Dark, what do they say? Fell and fair voices. That's one of Tolkien's favorite things to talk about. The way that elves speak, fell and fair voices coming out of this wine, and they drink it, and that is the punch in the face of love. That is the duende, that dark spirit of love that just takes them and just grapples them like that dragon into the carnality of the thing, the feast of the thing together on that boat. And, they spent the whole rest of that journey in what may have been their marriage bed in that cabin on that boat. Then the wind picks back up and the seas become less calm and they make it to Cornwall. And it's not until Tristan glimpses his uncle there on the beach that he kind of comes to out of the spell for a moment. And the sense of duty and honor, both that Isolde is carrying and that Tristan is carrying, breaks the spell for a second. Just enough time for Isolde to get off the boat and to meet Mark and to go to the castle. And as soon as they're out of sight from each other, the spell just creeps back in. And this tension, this magnetic tension, anywhere that Tristan is and Isolde is, if you walked through it, you would just get this like bolt, even if they were castles apart from each other, this bolt of energy. You were going to go right, Hallelujah, Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen every time you walk between them. And the marriage night happens, the wedding happens some days later. We're talking grand feasting, incredible bounty and grand feasting, and the wedding night happens and the marriage happens and Isolde is there and she's with Mark, but she's always looking for the eyes of Tristan at every moment. She's doing it because this is what she's here to do, but there's this pull, and Tristan is just watching her. He's so happy for his uncle. He's so happy for his uncle and for Cornwall and for this breaking of the tension between Ireland and his home. And he can't help the love that he feels. And that night, when Isolde is summoned to Mark's chamber to consummate this wedding, she calls her handmaiden Bronwyn. And if we remember, Isolde's mother is, witch prime among the witches of Ireland, deeply skilled. And Isolde is not unskilled herself, and she looks at Bronwyn and she says, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to King Mark's chamber in my shape and make love to him with everything you have. Because it's the only, I can't do it. I can't be with someone else but Tristan. And so she changes Bronwyn into herself and sends Bronwyn to King Mark's bed, to their marriage bed together. And night after night after night after night, from then on, this is their practice. Isolde spends the days laughing and connecting and being with King Mark and playing the harp, and all of the truth and beauty of the day life of marriage. And then at night, Bronwyn becomes Isolde and spends her nights with King Mark in the truth of the nightlife of a marriage. I don't think it's illusion. I don't think it's subterfuge. I think it's something else. There's truth in it and beauty. And Isolde spends her nights either pining after after Tristan, or finding ways to be with him. They send secret notes written in the shapes of broken twigs to each other on the river. Tristan would break twigs and then spell words, and they would float down the river, and she would look out her window, and they would like write poetry to each other, and he would sing like a nightingale below her window, and then she would sing out like a meadowlark from the top, and it was this incredible beauty. And they would play their harps together in the hall in front of everyone. And let me tell you, okay, we think Hallelujah is a great song. Something was happening here with this longing and this arrival and this fulfillment, dancing together every night in the hall. And at some point, one of the barons got wise. One of King Mark's friends was like, there's something happening here. He saw the glances. And at that time, King Mark invited Tristan to go on a hunting trip to try and break the tension. He was like, okay, barons, like I hear that you think something's going on. I'm just going to take Tristan away. We're going to have a boys' weekend out in the woods together. I'm going to prove to you that he's my loyal nephew. And on that hunting trip, they're out there deep on the moor together. Hunting is incredible. That they love each other so much, these two guys. Mark has no children. They love each other so much. He's like a son to him. And as they scare a boar out, another bigger boar comes running, and it tusks Tristan in the same damn spot on his thigh, penetrating him in this old wound. And he's rushed back to Cornwall, and Isolde demands to be the one who heals him. She's working on it. Well, while Tristan and Mark were away, the barons hired a detective named Merlot from France. I'm telling you, it's real. They hired this detective, and he comes. We're talking about this is the Sherlock Holmes moment. And he comes and he begins to watch, and he sets his okay, this is my beat, this is where I'm going to watch, this is what I'm going to do, and he's trying to gather information. And one night, while Isolde is off healing Tristan's wounds, he scatters white flour from the kitchen around her bed, just in the lightest dusting, so he can see the footprints of who may or may not be coming in and out of Isolde's bed. And that night, Isolde tells Tristan, okay, I'm done. I know you've got a bleeding wound, but I need you. I need you to be with me in my bed. And Tristan needs her. He says, I need you. And so he sneaks in the night after she sent Bronwyn to King Mark, and they spend the night together. And as Tristan is getting up to leave from this night of beauty and wonder and carnality that they've had together, his wound rips open, and 3 drops of blood fall into the flour. Or, it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to see what's happening here. And so when Merlot goes to check out his handiwork the next day, he indeed sees the 3 drops of blood there. And so they bring the accusation into the public against Tristan and Isolde that they're having infidelity with the king. Interestingly enough, we're in the center of courtly love, so it's like this huge deal, and also it's happening in every bedroom all over the castle. There's this thing happening that is really quite confusing, but they bring this accusation forth, and the penalty for proving it is that Isolde will be beheaded or burned. So it's like this weird moment that's happening, but they bring the accusation and they do a trial. Merlot lays it all out, and then they do this magical thing where they say, okay, we will know that you are innocent or guilty, you will have to walk across the room holding this iron rod. And if you're guilty, by the time you get to the other side of the room, this iron rod will be flaming hot and burning anyone's skin that touches it. And if you're innocent, the iron rod will be cool when you get to the other side of the room. And so Isolde picks up the iron rod and stately, like the most elvish walk you've ever seen. It's just like the procession of elves through the woods that just walks across this room with this elven rod light of foot. And when she gets to the other side, it is utterly cold. It is utterly cold. By some strange magic.
That's most Irons would
Yeah. Yeah. By some strange magic, it is utterly cold. And in the tension of all of this, afterwards, Tristan and Isolde decide to finally leave together. Like, we gotta get out of here. This is bad news. This is bad news. And so they leave. And it is said that they traveled out onto the moor. No one knows where they went. They traveled out onto the moor, and they built a tiny hut there on the moor for the first night. And in the freedom from the triangle of them and Mark, they just engaged. They just fell into this constant gazing into each other's eyes and love making, and then gazing into each other's eyes and forgetting about the world, just like spiraling into the domain of love and eros and the erotic there in this little hut. And the first night turned to the 50th night, and the 50th night turned to the 100th night, and they never left the hut except for to go get small game and berries and come back. And their clothes begin to deteriorate, and their state begins to deteriorate. And almost the intensity of the love begins to disappear. Without the triangle, without the court, without the secrecy, without the mystery, something just flees from their relationship, from this lovemaking. And one night, a hermit comes by. You know, this wandering aesthetic monk comes by and sits with them at dinner. And whatever he says turns their minds back towards Cornwall, and back towards duty, and back towards family, and back towards honor, and out of this locked lover's gaze. And he leaves, and that night, Isolde slips her wedding ring back on her finger as she's falling to sleep. And Tristan unsheathes his sword and puts it between them. And they sleep with the sword between them and the wedding ring on Isolde's finger. And when they wake in the morning, they wake to King Mark in the hut, looking at them, with the sword between them and the wedding ring on Isolde's finger. And whatever thing he told himself every step to get there, about what he was going to do, the revenge he was going to take, disappeared and melted in this moment. And he longed to invite Tristan back to court. And he invited Isolde back to court, but his barons forced him to send Tristan into exile. He said, they essentially said to him, the matters of your heart matter little to the matters of the countryside. And if you let Tristan back into the fold, there will be uproar. And so Tristan is sent away. And Tristan, after years, falls into a marriage with another woman named Isolde. Isolde of the White Hands in France. He goes back to his home. He's got a type, as they say. He falls in love with a woman named Isolde. And he builds a life there in France. And at some point, as his life deepens, as his love deepens there with his wife, as all of this, he becomes ill. His old wound begins to ache again. And he asks his wife to send for Isolde to heal him. And she does. She sends for Isolde, and he tells her. Tristan tells his wife, Isolde of the White Hands, tell Isolde if she's coming to have a white flag on her ship, and if she's sending a messenger to refuse me, to have a black flag on the ship as they come into the bay of Brittany. The message makes its way to Cornwall, and Isolde instantly has been feeling this longing and this opening of this old thing as well through time and space, and agrees and boards the ship with the white sail, and heads off towards Brittany. The ship rides the water on fast, swift winds with that lapping of the waves. I imagine Tristan's playing his harp of longing there, and over time and space, the waves and the harp are playing together, and the arrival is coming. This note of arrival is riding over the top of the whole thing. And he hears it over in his ears. And he asks his wife, Isolde of the White Hands, do you see the ship? She says, yes, I see the ship. It comes. He says, what color is the sail? And she tells him that the sail is black.
What?
And in that moment, Tristan plays his last note of longing in this world and dies in his bed. Isolde lands on the shore and comes to Tristan's place. And before she enters the door, she feels the leaving of her love from the world. She walks in to that emptiness and sits beside him in the bed and dies there in Tristan's bed on the other side of the world. And that note of arrival ceases from the world as well. And that is the story as best as I can tell it today. The end. Thanks for hanging in there, and just, give my gratitude to, Gottfried of Strassberg for writing down that story, and also for, the ever triggering Richard Wagner, turning it into an incredible opera and changing the face of modern music with his Tristan chord, and then to all the people who have stewarded that story in film and media, and and then to Martin Shaw, whose version of the story is deeply magical and informative of mine, and just take responsibility for any omissions or failures of plot or falsities that have entered. They are all my own. And thank you for being present for this story. So I'll just invite you to, as reciprocity to that story, for showing up for us, for being here, just to take a moment to drop back to that well place inside of you, and see if in that place of well and in that place of wellness in you, there's an image from the story, maybe something that challenged you, disgusted you, made you filled with joy and passion, something that just the one thing that you are feeling now, that you're with, an image. And as an act to feed the story back its own beauty, right? Like we all long to be seen and blessed, and I think stories do too. Just going to open a space to with our voices, with our spirit, just say those images out loud together, and all. You can do it on the Zoomy, and we think we can all hear and hear, and we can do it here, and I can say it if it's too quiet. And yeah, thank you.
The note of arrival, meeting the note of longing, meeting the music of the waves.
The note of longing.
The note of arrival, meeting the note of longing, meeting the music of the waves.
And Audrey says, the sea will take me to where I will be healed.
So for me, there's something in modern storytelling that's very linear, but in mythic storytelling, there's layers, right? There's layers of complexity. So in this story, I heard the layers of the sea and the sound and the longing, and the ships and the wind. So it's almost like how our senses layer with the smell and the sight, and we blend it all together. In this story, there's so many layers blended together. It was particularly the sea and the sound and the longing were all layers blended.
Yeah. Detective Merlot and the Secret Nightlife of Marriage are two spin-off stories that Alexis would like to hear.
Burning down the ship behind them.
That old wound, poison, touching that old wound again.
The old wound that keeps getting opened up again and again.
The father, instead of taking him away from court, deciding at that moment to tell him the true story of his life.
The days in the bog with just your nose sticking out.
Kicked off the Norwegian ship for being too good at chess.
When you get kicked off the Norwegian ship for just being a little bit too good at chess.
Isolde shamelessly carrying the iron rod.
Any last images longing for the light?
How long it took for someone in court to catch on.
Yeah, how long it takes for people to catch on sometimes.
to no fighting experience taking on a dragon.
Yeah. What is it about 14-year-olds?
I'll slay the dragon.
Mm.
Dueling love harps better than Hallelujah.
Mm-hmm. The love harps dueling better than Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. Yeah. Well, I just feel so blessed. Thank you for being here, doing this, choosing to do this with your Sunday night. And I just look forward to whatever this spins in your life, because it's spinning a lot in mine, and it's beautiful to be in this process. And yeah, I will. If there's anyone who, just email me if you have weird dreams. I want to hear your weird dreams inspired by Tristan and Isolde. That's my longing I'm going away with. So I look forward to more soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for getting me on my getting me started on my trip over the seas.
You're welcome. I heard, you got those notes of longing to carry you all the way over
That's
there.
it. That's right. That's exactly what it is. Hopefully I'll find a note of arrival.
Yes, I believe it.
Thanks, Chase.
You're welcome, Barbara.